Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to this week's edition of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys swinging by the channel to check the video out. Always very grateful for that. And guys, today's video, we're going to be talking about the 5 techniques that every bass angler really needs to master in order to be consistent in fishing, in order to excel and experience the ability to catch fish 12 months out of the year, anywhere you go in the country. I'm going to cover those 5 techniques in today's video. And I think once you get a grasp of them and once you incorporate that into your fishing, it's really going to help your success rate out anytime you go fishing. Also, guys, before we get started here, just a couple quick housekeeping tips before we get started on the seminar video. I know these videos, they require more of a time commitment. They're longer than my traditional videos, so I appreciate the time. And also, if you guys are like the content here on advanced bass fishing and you're wanting to give back to the channel for the information, best thing you can do, guys, is to go into my description of this video and just use and bookmark that tackle warehouse link. If you have to purchase tackle, you might as well use that link. It's a good way to support the channel out, and I'm really appreciated by me and my family, along with the all the other links I have in there, like my solar bat sunglasses link and channel memberships, all that type of stuff. So I really appreciate that. Like I said, a big round of gratitude from everybody here at the Bloggett household. Okay, guys, let's go through the 5 techniques that every angler needs to master. And this is, once you do this, once you learn each one of these techniques, you'll be able to go literally any lake in the country and catch fish, depending upon the conditions that you have. So I sort of what I want to do is I want to go over each specific technique and sort of give you some highlights of it and some suggestions, what I think as far as how you need to go about approaching it and how you need to learn how to do it. So anyway, the first one, guys, is topwater fishing. Any bass angler out there has got to master topwater bass fishing, because it's not only probably the most exciting way to catch fish, but it's one of the best ways to catch quality fish. Overall, when you get bit on a topwater, if you get bit on a topwater or flipping, it's usually a bigger fish. So topwater is something that you definitely have to understand. Now, the first consideration when you're wanting to master topwater is you have to understand which topwater category to use, as far as which lure to use based upon the conditions and the water temperature you fish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run you through the topwater season and sort of give you guys some tips and advice on each month, the topwaters that work the best. Now, early in the year, most of the time, you don't want to fish a topwater unless the water temperature is over a minimum of 55 degrees. Normally, based upon what part of the country you're in, that could be anywhere between February to May, geographically where you're at. But like here in Missouri, we hit 55-degree water temperature, usually like the end of March, and then it sort of gets below 55 sometime in December here. So we got a pretty long period of topwater, so that's the first consideration. But when you're dealing with cooler temperatures, like when the water temperatures are sort of in that 55 to 60 degree range, probably the best topwater you can fish is a buzzbait. A buzzbait is a really, really good cooler water topwater to fish, and for whatever reason, it's been productive forever. But one of my favorite topwaters for early season or late season, like in December, is like a 3/8 or ½ ounce black buzzbait. That's absolutely my favorite. Works really good under those conditions. And most of the time, water clarity needs to be anywhere between, say, 1 to 4 foot of clarity. Just fishing along the bank, fishing whatever shallow cover that you have available. Now, as that water temperature warms up and starts to warm up into the 60s and around 70 degrees, that opens up different type of topwaters to work. I sort of want to go through the transition here, but the transition for me usually occurs, it starts out with a buzzbait, and then the next lure, the next topwater that's really productive in the springtime of the year is either a wake bait or a popper. Now, a wake bait is, if you guys are not familiar with it, it's just like a topwater minnow that you just reel along the water slow on the surface like that. It throws out a V behind it. That's really good also early in the year when that water's in the 60s and 70s. I'll fish it either in the back of the coves or out on main lake points, especially if the water's really clear. And then also when that water's in the 60s and 70s, a chugger, like a popper, like some type of a popper, works really, really good. And also, guys, I'll link all the baits in the Tackle Warehouse description here if you guys want to get some of the categories here. But like a popper in the month of April and May is a really good lure selection. And one of my favorite ways to fish a popper when the water temperature's like that is to fish it around any riprap bank. bridge riprap, dam riprap. It could be riprap between docks, but a popper is a really good bait to fish when the fish are in shallow water, because you can control that. You can keep the popper in one small area for a long time, and especially around shade, that type of deal. Now, as the water temperature warms up even more and you start to get into May into early June, that is when I start going to a frog. Just a topwater frog is a really good bait to fish, a little bit later in that time frame, fishing it, around any shade pockets, shallow targets, underneath overhanging trees, underneath boat docks. Really, really good, bait to use in that situation. The month of June is when I start fishing usually a walking topwater. A walking topwater like a Zerspook or Megabass Diamante fished on main lake points in the month of June is a really good way to catch post-spawn bass, especially in clear water. One of my favorite techniques in June, guys, is get out on main lake points if you got water visibility of over like 3 feet, and just fan cast that walking topwater all over around those points. Anywhere between, hold on one second, guys. I just had the cameras get relieved. She was saying something to me, but anyway, anytime that those fish are on those main lake points in June, that's a great way to catch them on a walking topwater. Now, as the summer rolls around, it starts to get hot, specifically like in July and August. That is when I go back to a buzz bait, but I go to small. In the middle of the summer, I was throwing like a bigger 1/2 ounce buzz bait in the pre-spawn and later in the fall, but in the summertime, a little bitty 1/4 ounce or an 1/8 ounce buzzer is going to be really good. Fishing, same deal, low light conditions right off the bat early in the morning around rocky banks, grass, whatever shallow cover that you have. As you get into late summer into early fall, that's when I start throwing a whopper plopper. A whopper plopper or some type of a buzz toad are really good techniques to fish in late summer and early fall. There's something about a whopper plopper or like a horny toad, something like that, just covering water, fishing shallow water. Doesn't really matter about the water clarity. I've caught them in dirty water, I've caught them in real clear water, but those fish really will react well to that, some type of a walking topwater in that scenario. And then in the fall time of the year, when you start to get close to where that water temperature starts to drop a little bit, starts to come down a little bit, that opens it up to a lot of different stuff to can work in. I've caught them good in the fall time on a buzz bait. I've caught them good on a wake bait. I've caught them good on a walking topwater. I've caught them good on a chugger. It really just depends on the situation you have. In general, what you're going to find in the fall or any other time of the year is that it's all about the water clarity in relationship to the type of topwater you fish. In general, the off-colored water, if you have water visibility, guys, of like less than 3 feet, your buzzbait and your chuggers, that type of stuff are going to work really good. And if that water clarity is a lot cleaner, then your walking topwaters and your wake baits are going to work better. So anyway, that's topwater. We're going to take a quick break here. We'll be back with the second technique that you really need to master. Okay, guys, we're back. Now, the next category that we're going to get into is chatterbaits. Chatterbaits, it's not really a lure category. It is a specific type of a lure, and it's such a productive lure, and it's such a versatile, diverse lure that I wanted to include it in its separate category itself. So I want to go through each one of these guys. I want to go through it in seasons, conditions and seasons, because that'll sort of give you an idea when you want to throw it the best and master it the best. Now, a chatterbait has shown its ability to catch fish under a wide range of conditions and a wide range of times a year. A lot of people initially saw chatterbaits as like a shallow grass type lure, which it does work good in that situation. It is probably best in grass, but you can catch a ton of fish on it just fishing it around whatever cover that you got. Now, my chatterbaits fishing, I usually start fishing it when that water temperature first starts hitting about 50 degrees. Once that water starts to hit 50 and is in the low 50s, that's when they'll start biting a chatterbait. And I just basically get into those pre-spawn type of areas, and I'm usually using some type of like a crawdad pattern, like a green pumpkin or a brown or orange with a green pumpkin trailer, trying to resemble some type of a crawdad. And I just fish it on all of those staging type areas, normally around some type of steeper rock banks, lay down trees. Obviously, if you have grass beds, that's going to be the best thing, like submergent hydrilla, submergent milfoil, going to be a really good way to catch them. And this is going to last all the way up until where that water temperature starts to get, into the low 60s, fishing those staging type areas, a little bit steeper drop type areas. And normally that time of year, I'm fishing it slow. A lot of times I'll throw that chatterbait out there. I'll even let it sink to the bottom and I just pump it off the bottom, or I just slow roll it. So this is the type of thing you want to keep the chatterbait close to the bottom, you know, when you're fishing it during the pre-spawn. Now, as it warms up and you start to get into the, you know, sort of that April, May type of a time frame, that is when those fish on the chatterbait will move shallow, and they stay shallow all the way through the fall. So I'm fishing specifically the chatterbait around whatever shallow targets that we have on the body of water that you're fishing. Now, it could be anything: grass, logs, you know, wood, docks, whatever your lake has, even on rocky banks. I mean, just bare banks, it works pretty good. But you fish it shallower and you fish it faster. Normally, once that water temperature starts getting up above 60, I'm throwing the chatterbait out there and I'm starting my retrieve as soon as it hits the water. And I'm just using a medium stop and go retrieve. And it's really, really good all year long, all spring, all summer, and early fall, fishing it tight to targets for those fish to ambush it. So I'll throw it along the edge of dock corners. I'll throw it on the edge of out, you know, lay down trees next to a stump. I'll throw it on the edge of a grass line, anywhere where those bass can ambush the prey. And the color selections usually depends on the water clarity, because in the pre-spawn, I'm using the crawdad pattern. Usually in May and June, the shad start spawning, so I use like a white or a pearl, you know, go to a shad pattern. And then in the summertime, I'll switch to a perch pattern, something with like green or orange, because a lot of the bluegills are spawning. And then in the fall time of the year, I usually go back to the shad, because they usually start feeding on shad a little bit more that time of year. Most of the time I'm fishing it like on 17 to 20 pound test Seaguar and Vizex line. I use it on that Megabass launcher rod. One tip I'll give you guys on a chatterbait is you need to use a medium action rod on the tip. One of the biggest ways you'll lose fish on a chatterbait is to use too stiff of a rod. So try to use a rod that's got some give to it. And I want to say this because you will lose a lot of fish on a chatterbait if you don't do this. But when you're reeling that chatterbait in and you anticipate that strike, or when you get that strike, don't set the hook immediately as soon as you feel that. If you feel a fish bite it, just start reeling fast and pull into it, because the easiest way to lose fish on chatterbait is to use too stiff of a rod and set the hook too soon. I know that's hard to resist, because especially if you haven't had a bite for a while, you want to jack them right off the bat. So really try to resist that. And just experiment with retrieve. One of the things that will help you to master a chatterbait, guys, is learn the mood and the personality of the fish on the retrieve. Sometimes they want to slow roll, sometimes they want to pump and retrieve, sometimes they want to burn under the surface, sometimes they want a medium stop and go. You just have to vary it. But one thing that I will tell you, a little trick about a chatterbait, is that pump and retrieve that I'm talking about is deadly, especially if you're fishing deeper grass. All you guys that fish hydrilla and milfoil, try throwing that chatterbait out there, let it go to the bottom, and just pump it off the bottom about a foot or two. Let it fall back down. And I have caught a lot of fish doing that with a chatterbait. So that's chatterbait. We'll take another quick break, and we're going to get back to the third lure category. Okay, guys, we're back. Now, the third category we're talking about is a shaky head worm. Guys, the shaky head worm is freaking deadly. It's deadly anywhere you go. There's not a single state across the country where shaky head doesn't work good. And this is one technique that you definitely need to master, because there's times when you can catch bass on a shaky head and you can't catch them on anything else. A shaky head will catch a lot of fish, and it also catches good fish under certain conditions. So I'm going to get into that a little bit here. First of all, shaky head is one of those baits that'll work 12 months out of the year. It'll work in winter, spring, summer, and fall, just depending upon the situation that you're in. But I'm going to sort of go over some times a year you really need to put a shaky head on and not take it off. The first time, guys, the best time to fish a shaky head by far is from about the sort of the mid pre-spawn, early into the late post-spawn. So when the water temperature is between, say, 50 to 70 degrees, usually anywhere between, March into May, this is the prime shaky head time. Shaky head, I would put a shaky head in my top 3 favorite lures during that pre-spawn period out there. There's just something about it. The fish really react to it. They like it. They'll really bite it really good. And most of the time in the pre-spawn like that, I'm fishing a little bit larger worm on it. My favorite, or my 2 favorites, is a just using like a Zoom trick worm or like a soft plastic stick bait, like a Cinco or a Zoom Slinky. In fact, that's probably the one I use more than anything else. And another key with it is you want to use a light head. Try using a 1/16 of an ounce head, that Gamakatsu tricky head. I'll link it in the description also. Really good bait for that time of year. You'll catch a lot more fish on a 1/16 ounce than you will throwing an 1/8 ounce or a 1/4 ounce. That's absolutely my favorite size. There's something about the way it makes the bait fall that they just react to it better. And colors, 95% of the time I'm using a green pumpkin or watermelon. If the water does have a little bit of color to it, sometimes I go to a black trick worm, but the green pumpkin and the watermelon is going to be my best. And most of the time I'm fishing it around those areas that the fish are staging in, they're spawning in, or they're holding up for post-spawn. So in the pre-spawn, I'm fishing that shaky head in and around secondary points, on bluff banks, on channel banks. Once those fish get spawning, I'm going back into the spawning coves and just casting it in and around those areas where I think the fish are spawning. And then during the post-spawn, I move back out to the main lake and secondary points and fish it in that type of water. Now, as you get into the summertime a little bit, it changes a little bit. And as the water warms up, you need to go to a larger shaky head, a little bit heavier shaky head. So in the summertime of the year, one of my favorite techniques to use it is I put it on one of those big shaky heads, like a 1/4 or 3/8 ounce shaky head, and I'll put that Zoom Magnum finesse worm on it, which is a fat worm, and I fish it on structure, fish it on deep points, around brush piles, drop-offs, ledges. It's a really, really good bait in the summertime of the year. Same place that you'd basically be fishing a big worm or like a football head jig. So all you guys, for example, if you fish Lake Gunnersville or Kentucky Lake and you're catching them on a big worm or a football head jig or deep cranking, you can take that big shaky head and you can, once they've stopped biting everything else, you can throw that in there and catch a lot of fish on it. And in the fall time of the year, it's the same thing. I'm usually staying on points, fishing a little bit deeper on the points with it, and just depending upon the water clarity and the species of fish, that dictates the size of worm I'm using. If I have a lot of spotted bass or smallmouth in the lake, a lot of times I'm using a smaller worm, like a little 4-inch finesse worm. But if it's predominantly a largemouth lake, that's when I'm using a little bit larger worm, like the trick worm. But you can't go wrong with it. Usually fishing it on an 8-pound test Seaguar and Vizex line, 6-foot 10-inch spinning rod, and it'll get as many bites as any lure out there. So that shaky head, got 2 more, be right back and we'll get into the last 2. Okay guys, got last 2 we're gonna be talking about here, and the last 2 are shallow crankbaits and flipping. And also what I'll do, guys, in my Tackle Warehouse link, each one of these lure categories I'm talking in, I'll put a couple of my favorite baits of each one of these categories in that description if you guys want to try them, to have some that sort of match what we're talking about here in the video. Okay guys, shallow cranking is another technique you have got to learn. It is an absolute must, because shallow cranking, in my opinion, is it's probably the most effective way to fish shallow water, obviously. I mean, if you can catch fish on a lot of different stuff, shallow, spinnerbait, flipping, all that type of stuff, but it's hard to beat a shallow crankbait. When I'm talking about a shallow crankbait, I'm talking about a crankbait that normally runs like less than 5 foot deep, 5 or 6 feet deep. And you can catch fish on a shallow crankbait that runs 5 or 6 feet deep all year long. They're really, really good for that. So I'll sort of talk a little bit about my favorite crankbaits per season. Now, in the wintertime, I will use crankbait some, but a lot of it depends on the water temperature I'm fishing. If I'm fishing a part of the country where that water temperature stays in the 50s during the wintertime, that's a really good time to fish, like your wiggle warts and your shad wraps, that type of stuff. But normally that type of water temperature is associated with the pre-spawn, and that is some of my favorite baits. And during the pre-spawn time of the year, when that water temperature is in the 50s, a wiggle wart is one of my favorite baits, followed up by the shad wrap, followed up by a square bill crankbait, something like a speed trap, or even a lipless crankbait, which can be fished shallow as well. And in the pre-spawn like that, there's 2 baits that probably I use more than anything else. I use a wiggle wart a lot, or a rock crawler or something like that, anytime I'm fishing around rocky banks where the water temperature is under 60 degrees. Once that water, or actually 57 or something like that. Once that water temperature starts getting above 55, 57 degrees, I make a switch over to a square bill crankbait, like the Megabass S-Crank 1.5, and I continue fishing rocky banks. The reason I go to the S-Crank a little bit, or the square bill, is that water temperature warms up, those fish will actually get shallower than they were with the wiggle wort. And the square bill allows me to fish rocky banks, lay down trees, over grass, anything like that. Really, really good selection during the pre-spawn time of the year. Now, there's sort of a dead period for crankbaits when the fish spawn. One of the things you're going to find out about, when the fish are in the mood to spawn, they don't bite crankbaits very good. They tend to like bottom baits. But I start fishing a crankbait again during the post-spawn. And the post-spawn time of the year, normally like in the month of May, something like that, that is when I'm starting to go back to the square bill, but I'm going to a larger square bill. In the pre-spawn, right around that period, I'm using the S-Crank 1.5. In May, during the post-spawn, I go to the big size, like the Megabass 2.0, or like a Strike King 2.5, like a 3-inch long, large square bill crankbait. And I fish it around any shallow cover in off-colored water, and I burn it fast, fishing it pretty fast. Not like as fast as I will in the summertime when we talk about it, but a pretty good clip. And one of the things you'll find about it is those fish, after they get to the spawn and they're hungry, and you can catch a lot of fish on a big square bill crankbait, just cranking whatever shallow cover that you have available. Now, in the summertime of the year, there's 2 crankbaits that I use. One is, again, the square bill, and normally I'm using a smaller square bill, but the other one is just some type of a small, medium, or not, it's a shallow crankbait, but it's got a medium lip on it, like that Bandit 200 or the Megabass Z-Crank, like the Z2. These are crankbaits that'll run about 4 to 6 foot deep or something on 10-pound test line. And one of the things that you're going to find out for crankbait fishing in the summertime is, as the summer progresses, they want a smaller bait. So I start out with the square bill like in July and August, and by the time August rolls around, like mid-August, that's when I go to the little finessey crankbaits, like the little Bandit, little Megabass Z-Crank, something like that. Fishing it again around whatever rock and wood that you have, whatever shallow cover that you have available. But you're going to find out that smaller crankbait is going to be really, really effective under those situations. Now, in the fall time of the year, fall time is a great time to fish crankbaits also. Normally I'm going to some type of a shad pattern. And fall is actually a time of the year where a wider range of shallow crankbaits work. Once that water temperature starts falling down into the 60s and low 70s after it's been hot in the summer, you can catch them on the wiggle wort again, you can catch them on square bills, you can catch them on the smaller crankbaits. A lot of different type of actions will work. The fish are not quite as finicky as they are earlier in the year with that. So that's sort of a technique that you need to master with that. And one of the things about mastering a square bill crankbait, guys, it's really, really key to keep in mind the speed to retrieve and your cadence on it, because the speed to retrieve that you reel a square bill crankbait and the stop and go, or the straight retrieve, it has a lot to do with what the fish want, mood and personality. In general, with the exception of during the pre-spawn when the water temperature is in the 50s, they like a little bit faster retrieve on a shallow crankbait. So normally, once that water temperature gets over 65 degrees, I'm fishing those shallow crankbaits at a pretty good clip all the way through the fall time of the year. And of course, colors completely depend on your water clarity. I like the blackback chartreuse sides in dirty water, and then I mix them up between perch patterns and shad patterns and other type of situations. Okay, and finally, guys, the technique, and the most important technique to master that you're gonna have to, is flipping and pitching. Flipping and pitching is, even though it has not produced like it has in the past over the years since people started using a lot of electronics, pitching and flipping is a mainstay, and it's something that you can catch fish on a wide range, a diverse range of type of cover. It works all over the country, anywhere that you go, and it's something as a serious bass angler, this is one technique that you're going to have to master. Now, the first thing that you got to realize about the pitching and flipping technique is it's about the technique as far as making the cast. We can get into the lures and all the equipment and the type of water you want to fish it in, but ultimately, if you're not a good, accurate pitcher and flipper, you're never going to have a lot of success at it. So first thing that you need to do in order to master the art of pitching and flipping is you have to get good casting it. You have to practice a lot. You have to get good flipping and pitching. So spend a lot of time practicing the technique, you know, in your backyard or wherever you're fishing, because flipping and pitching, it's all about putting the bait where you want it. You know, with all the other stuff we've talked about as far as the crankbaits and the chatterbaits and topwaters, you don't have to have the casting accuracy. You can be off on your casting, and you can miss your target by 2 or 3 feet and still catch some fish. That's not the way it is in flipping and pitching. Flipping and pitching is a precise technique. You have to put the bait right where you want to put it in order to get the bite. So that is the number one thing by far with that. Second deal is having the right setup. You know, you need a good quality, you know, 7'11", 7'10", 7'11" flipping stick. I don't like a broom handle flipping stick. I use that Megabass Alcleys as my favorite, that Orochi series. Usually use 20 to 25 pound test Seaguar and Bizex line. I do not like using braided line flipping. I'll do it on rare occasions if I'm flipping mats, but you'll get so many more bites if you fish fluorocarbon line over braided line with that. Another big aspect about pitching and flipping is understanding the bait profile and the type of bait that they want, because depending upon the cover you're fishing and the water clarity, the size of the lure that you have, the weight of it, and the profile and the color make all the difference in the world. I mean, let's say, for example, if you and I go out, you know, flipping flooded bushes or flipping docks or whatever, there may be one specific weight and color that those fish want. They may want a green pumpkin on an 1/8 ounce sinker, and you'll fish everything else that you have in your box and never get a bite. Sometimes they want a black and blue jig, like a big black and blue jig, and they don't want anything else. So you have to really experiment with your lure categories, flipping and pitching. But my favorite flipping and pitching baits are this, guys. I like a jig, I like a full-size jig, usually with a Zoom big salty chunk. Like a creature bait, like a Zoom Z-Hog or a beaver. I flip some worms like a Zoom Ultra Vibe speed worm. I flip a trick worm. I'll flip a fluke sometimes, a straight tailed fluke. I like fishing the tube, you know, when the bite's really tough. And don't be afraid to go small. I mean, I'll flip like a little 4-inch worm a lot of times too if the fishing's really tough. But once you master that technique and sort of get a feel for the bait profile and the bait category and the colors, that's when things sort of, you know, start clicking. And the only way you can really do that is experiment and just try something for 15 or 20 minutes. If it doesn't work, put something else on and see if it works. And that's the same with all the 5 categories we talked about here, guys. It's like when you're talking about topwater, chatterbaits, cranking, or flipping, something like that, there are a ton of variables that go with that. I mean, you've got, like I said, the cast that you make. It depends on where you're fishing at, your boat angle, your casting angle, your bait color, your bait profile. And I don't mean it to sound intimidating or overwhelming, but there's a lot to consider. And it's like, a lot of times, if you don't hit on all that stuff just right, you're not going to catch many fish. So here's a good rule of thumb. Let's say that you get into an area where you know there's a few fish there. Maybe you've gotten a few bites or you've caught a few fish, and you know there's some fish using whatever you're fishing, whether it be the Rocky Bank or boat docks or something like that. If something's working a little bit, try something else a little bit and try it for 10 or 15 minutes. Like, say, for example, if you go down a row of boat docks with a black and blue jig and you catch 2 or 3 fish, come back through that same row of boat docks with a green pumpkin creature bait or green pumpkin worm. Sometimes just that change in profile or weight or color it's like turning on a light switch as far as how many more fish that you're going to catch. I'll give you guys an example here. I was fishing up at Stockton Lake last year. Water was in the bushes and I was flipping. And normally up there, I catch a lot of fish flipping that Z-Hog, a creature bait. That's my favorite bait to fish in the bushes up there. And I was catching a few. I wasn't catching as many as what I thought I was catching. So I started experimenting a little bit, and I put on a big jig, like a big 5/8 ounce jig with a big Zoom super chunk on it. And guys, I just ripped them on the thing. I got more bites than I did on the creature bait, bigger bites. For whatever reason, they just wanted a jig. And I've seen other situations where I've been catching a fish or two on a jig, and then I'll make a switch and I'll put on like a little straight-tailed worm or a little grub or something like that and catch 10 times as more and bigger ones. So don't be afraid to experiment with that. But anyway, guys, main thing about it is these are 5 techniques that you really need to spend some time on. I know we covered them super fast here. You know, we could have spent an hour on each one of them, but learn to fish your topwaters, you know, learn to fish a chatterbait, learn shallow cranking, you know, learn, you know, the flipping and pitching, and, you know, shaky head fishing, all that finesse type of stuff. And once you do that, if you master those 5 techniques we talked about in here, you're going to be able to catch fish in just a wide range of scenarios. So anyway, guys, hope it helps out, and we'll talk to y'all next week.